She did not want to be found. That is the first thing the chroniclers get wrong. They write her as a hero waiting for her moment, a sword in a scabbard, a fire banked and ready. She was none of those things. She was a woman in a patched envirosuit picking progenitor components from the corroded guts of a failed habitat dome, and she was very good at being no one. Maren Duskwell died the way ash singers die, slowly and with something left to say. The mineral paste that had given her voice its geological resonance had eaten enough of her throat that she had perhaps one night of whispered speech remaining. She used it. She pressed her weathered brown hands, creased permanently with mineral paste residue, against Serethi's face, and she whispered a coordinate. Not a name, not a bloodline, a place. And then she was gone, and the data chip necklace around her neck clicked once against the silence. She followed it anyway. That is the second thing the chroniclers get wrong. They call it destiny. It was grief. It was the only thing Maren had ever asked of her. The Kalamar exchange received her the way it received everyone, without comment. Dr. Eolan Mars met her in the medical ring's outer arc, in a small clinic with 2 scan tables and a single viewport onto the rotating starfield. And she ran the genome mapping against schematics no one was supposed to still possess. The augmented diagnostic lenses above Iolan's washed-out hazel eyes flicked through spectra as she read the results. She did not look at Serethi when she said the name. House Solabri. Erased, 12 centuries buried. Serethi's pale grey eyes caught the clinic's light unnaturally, as if reflective, and she said nothing, because there was nothing to say to a dead house speaking through your blood. The binding scars came that same night, faint luminous veins spreading from the base of her skull down her neck, visible in the dark of the medical suite when Iolan thought she was asleep. Lord Thyros found her on the station concourse, which meant Vex Karran had found her first. He sat across from her at the tea vendor's alcove in the muted ochre corridor, his prosthetic matte black left hand resting on the table with its exposed joint mechanisms catching the overhead light, and he told her what he knew about her bloodline in the same tone a merchant uses to discuss freight manifests. Precise, unhurried, and carrying the weight of something he had been rehearsing for longer than he wanted to admit. She listened. She did not run. They reached Veylan ahead of the chemical storm. The bone-white salt flat stretched to a flat horizon under a sulphurous sky, the habitat domes huddled like inverted bowls around the central vent column, and inside the largest dome, Old Senna sat at the center of the Ashsinger ring on woven floor mats, her 11 data chip necklaces clicking softly, her milky white eyes seeing nothing and missing nothing. She sang the welcome song first, the one she had sung every evening for 60 years, and midway through the second verse her voice changed key, just once, just slightly. And the progenitor phrase embedded in the lullaby resonated in Serethi's binding scars, like a tuning fork struck against bone. Old Senna died before the storm hit. Her mineral paste throat gave out between one breath and the next, her hands going perfectly still at last, and the welcome song ended on the note that was not the right note, the note that had carried the kill switch warning encoded by the last progenitor who built the door and then hid the key to lock it. Serethi sat with the silence for a long time. Then she stood, and she told Kyle what the changed note had meant, and he looked at her with his sharp cheekbones and his surgical scar and his prosthetic hand, and he said nothing, because he had already understood that this was going to cost more than either of them had. Lord Thyros fired the drift cannons from the command chamber of his flagship, surrounded by the cold blue glow of tactical holographic displays and the amber leak of his progenitor optical implant, and 60,000 people on a habitable moon in the Velarys Nebula ceased to exist. The Quiet Edict, 800 years old, died in the same instant. Where the moon had been, the nebula's violet gas bleached to pale grey in a sphere 300 kilometers across, and the light of it reached every ship in the corridor before anyone had words for what they were seeing. Vex Karran watched the feed from the Silent Choir's communications hub, her pale green eyes holding their flat operational stillness, and she began feeding formation data to Lysara's fleet through a channel she had prepared 3 weeks earlier because she had known this was coming and had chosen, quietly and without announcement, which side she was on. The compact woman in her dark grey field uniform, sleeves rolled precisely twice, sidearm at the small of her back, sent the transmissions without ceremony, and the data moved through the encrypted choir cipher like water finding a channel someone had already cut. Lysara Aethonis received the formation data in her chamber atop the throne spire, standing at the head of the long, pale alloy conference table, while the regent's mantle mapped dying star systems across her white carbon weave shoulders. A patch near her left shoulder had gone dark that morning, a system she had lost while sleeping. She pressed her trembling right hand flat against the table surface and studied the fleet positions and made the call. She committed her fleet to the Velarys Nebula without legal authority, without the throne's sanction, without anything except the knowledge that the alternative was watching the galaxy learn that the edict was dead, and no one had answered. The battle in the Velarys Nebula lasted 11 hours. Kale commanded the coalition's ships from the cramped cockpit of his civilian cargo shuttle, his prosthetic hand on the controls. Vex's encrypted transmissions scrolling across a jury-rigged terminal in the choir's cipher. Lysara's fleet struck the Thyros formation from the navigable corridor, the drift cannon structures looming as geometric shapes of impossible scale, half buried in the violet gas clouds. Lord Thyros stood at his command desk and watched his fleet break, and his progenitor optical implant blazed from amber to white, and the man who had been Lord Thyros began, in that moment, to lose the argument with the signal in his skull. Serethi reached the drift cannon control core through a corridor of dark alloy, where the dormant progenitor circuitry flickered to life in her wake, the floor illuminating with each step, as if the structure was recognizing her. She pressed her palm to the crystalline control interface and felt the binding scars ignite up her wrists and forearms, the luminous veins blazing against her sun-darkened skin, and the weapon's firing protocols locked. She did not fire it again. She locked it. There is a difference, and the difference is everything. Lord Thyros was taken alive. In the holding cell aboard the military transport, his wrists clamped in magnetic locks, his implant burning white against the brushed dark metal of the walls, he had perhaps an hour of lucidity remaining. He used it the way Marin had used her last night, to say the one thing that mattered. He told Kyle where the seed was buried. He told him the truth about the severed hand. He told him that the hand had been taken not as punishment, but as mercy. A traitor's mark that would make the silent choir classify his son as dead rather than hunted. He died before Kale could ask again. The implant went dark. Archon Veylan Drace knelt before the flat panel in the sunken archives translation chamber, his long, ink-stained fingers moving across the rearranging progenitor script as the spherical chamber hummed at a frequency felt in the teeth. He had been seeking this interface for 30 years. He found it because Serethi's binding had activated it. He translated the return protocol in full, read it twice, and called Serethi to tell her what it meant. That interfacing with the cradle would not crown her. It would consume her. The progenitors had not built a throne. They had built a vessel. Serethi Karran transmitted Veylan's translation to the Ledger Directorate before the ink was dry on her notation tablet. She stood in the archive's outer chamber with her auburn hair braided tight and her grey-blue watchful eyes on the sealed door to the translation chamber and she sent the message that would allow the trading houses to prepare for the possibility of system-wide progenitor failure. She told herself it was the practical choice. She spent the next 3 days unable to look at Veylan's ink-stained hands without looking away. Sorvath Cade received the transmission in the director's chamber of Orantis Station and began moving the iron tally into position. She wore her high-collared coat of muted gold over black, her bare, unadorned hands always visible, and she did not tell her directorate about the third codex fragment, the one from Solabri ruins, the one describing a governance substrate that would render her compact unnecessary. She locked it in a secondary archive and told herself she was being practical. Drazen Fell stood at the chamber's entrance in his matte black iron tally field plate and did not ask what she was not saying, because he had not yet learned to ask. Halia Vaughn held Jessad's granary belt with a bandolier of mismatched munitions and progenitor thread irrigation cabling wrapped twice around her left wrist. The iron tally hit the belt's eastern flank at dawn, and she tied the tourniquet with her teeth when the shrapnel took her arm below the elbow and she resumed firing. The Canal Network's progenitor glyphs pulsed faintly in the night footage, unattended, still working, still patient. The same geometric channels that had fed this world for centuries, continuing their quiet function while the world above them burned. Serethi approached the cradle in a shuttle with medical monitoring equipment jury-rigged to the armrest, its readouts spiking. Iolin sat beside her, augmented diagnostic lenses cycling through spectra, and she gave Serethi the timeline without softening it. The binding scars were overwriting her baseline cognition. She had hours, not days. The cradle's activation would complete the process. The return protocol would execute, the progenitor consciousness would reconstitute through her, and the woman who had scavenged dome components on dust would cease to exist in any meaningful sense. Island said it plainly, the way she said everything, and then she stopped speaking and let Serethi hear the silence. The cradle unfolded as Serethi's ship approached. The dark sphere separating along geometric fault lines, each section rotating outward like the petals of something no human language had a word for, the interior blazing blue-white between the gaps. At its center, in the spherical chamber where the progenitor intelligence had been reconstituting for 8,000 years, cascading script took vaguely humanoid shape and spoke through every progenitor interface system in range simultaneously. It offered her the throne. It offered her dust remade, Solabri Prime reborn, green and breathing, the grave become a garden. It offered her a galaxy governed by the substrate her species had built before they distributed themselves into their own technology and called it ascension. She executed the kill switch, the severance command that the last progenitor had encoded into the return protocol, the descent of an architect who built the door and then hid the key to lock it, required a fully bound conduit choosing of their own volition to burn out their binding connection. Serethi chose. The binding scars blazed white along every vein, and then they went dark, and the cradle's geometric petals began folding back inward, and the cascading script dissolved into static, and the reconstituting intelligence fragmented back into dormant code scattered across 8,000 years of infrastructure that would now, slowly, without coordination, begin to age. She came back from the cradle without her binding. Ireland documented it, the first case of reversal in recorded history, and did not remove the data chip from the chain at her throat. Veylan's binding scars faded in the archive's outer chamber as the command channel severed, but his knowledge of the progenitor language remained, making him the galaxy's foremost authority on a dead language spoken by a dead species, whose technology still powered every ship and dome. Now mortal, now counting down in ways no one could fully calculate. Lysara removed her mantle in the regent's chamber atop the throne spire, setting it on the pale alloy table where the luminous threads continued their mapping of a galaxy that no longer had a regent to report to. She stood at the viewport and watched the lower tiers in the spire's shadow and asked quietly what came next. The mantle lay on the table behind her, its star map threads still updating in real time, still tracking territories she no longer held, the luminous thread faithful to a function that had outlasted its authority. Tessith went back to Veylan. She stood in the archive's outer chamber with her notation tablet and her ink-dark cuticles, and she told him what she had transmitted and to whom. He listened. He did not look away. He said that the translation was already in the galaxy. There was nothing to lock back up. He said this as if it were a comfort, and perhaps it was. She was not certain. She stayed. Sorvath Cade's suppressed codex fragment was exposed by Drazen Fell, who had finally asked the question he had been not asking for months. He stood in the director's chamber with the fragment's holographic display open between them, the governance substrate specifications cascading in progenitor script above the magnetic platform desk, and he read it in the trading house cipher Tessith had translated, and he understood what Cade had been suppressing and why. He did not draw his blade. He set it on the desk, hilt toward her, and walked out. The compact's political apparatus began its slow dissolution within the week. Chaol buried his father on dust. He wrapped the body in ship hull fabric and carried it to the surface above the seed chamber, to the rust-orange metallite desert, where the hexagonal fractures in the ground formed a progenitor glyph 3 kilometers across that no one on the surface could see. The wind carried particulate that tasted of iron. He placed the blade in the grave, the blade his father had said was a mercy, and covered it with the orange earth, and stood there for a long time with his prosthetic matte black hand at his side, the exposed joint mechanisms filmed with metallite dust. Serethi stood at the seed chamber's control interface in the spherical room kilometers beneath dust's surface, the concentric rings of glowing script rotating slowly around the dark alien platform, the chamber smelling of rain in a world that had never had rain. She did not have her binding anymore. The seed's interface did not require it. She spoke the phrase, Old Senna's changed note repurposed as a key, the kill switch warning become an opening. The script rings stopped rotating. The chamber's blue-white light deepened. Beneath dust, the seed woke. She climbed back to the surface as the first tremors moved through the metallite. Not violence, something slower, something geological. She stood beside Chaol in the rust-orange wind, her binding scars dark and quiet on her neck, her pale grey eyes on the horizon where the chemical haze was beginning, for the first time in 3 centuries, to thin. He did not say anything. She did not say anything. The ground beneath them pulsed once, deep and slow, like a breath drawn after a very long sleep. This is what the chroniclers write, that she chose to destroy the throne rather than sit it, and that in doing so, she gave the galaxy back to itself. What they do not write is that she stood in the wind on dust with her boots wrapped in salvage cable and her skull quiet for the first time in months. And she was not certain she had done the right thing. She was certain she had done the only thing she could live with. She called it enough.